point is that the tunes that we write aren't in any idiom, idiot. They are. It's just, I think it's just the arrangements, like the arrangements of today. For instance, From Me to You, you know, it could be done as a sort of old ragtime tune, especially the middle eight. And so, you know, we're not writing the tunes in any particular idiom. So, in fact, in 5 years' time, we may arrange the tunes differently, but we probably write the same old rubbish.
And how do you judge a good song when you've written it? By what?
By us liking it. You know, John and I, if we like it, then we think it's a good one. It's a combination of liking it and what is commercial, what we think other people are like.
Can it be a good song if you like it and nobody was to buy it? That hasn't happened yet. But...
Well, it always is for us. If we like it, in fact, you know, we don't like bad songs. That's all there is to it.
Could you go back to doing something else?
Oh, I don't know. I'd miss doing this, but I think I'd think of something else to do.
What would you do?
I'd like to do. Write songs for other people.
Yeah. Anything completely different?
Completely different. Retire, you know, that's completely different.
Through the use of repeated statements, Mike Williams attempts to program his audience with the idea that the Beatles could not have written their songs because they had no formal training and could not read or write music. Attempting to persuade his viewers that formal musical training and being able to read and write music are necessary for writing successful pop songs is yet another example of dishonesty and deception. One of the greatest forms of mind control is to limit the sense of the possible. As discussed in the previous two videos, Mike uses the tactic of limiting possibility in his viewers' minds throughout his presentation. It is, in fact, one of the bedrocks of his presentation. Mike attempts to instill in his viewers' minds that the Beatles could not have written their songs because their songs evolved in complexity and maturity at an exponential rate, at a very rapid pace. According to Mike, there was a quantum leap forward in songwriting abilities, something that only a musician with formal training could accomplish. This overly simplistic narrative that early songs were simple and suddenly became complex is a subject matter that Mike gives no context to, elaborates upon, or provides any evidence of at all. For the simple reason that it's not true. It's yet another fabrication. All that Mike can do then is program his audience with that idea by using repetition. Mike simply repeats that Beatles music started off simply and became complex 17 times in just over 6.5 minutes. This sheer amount of repetition, with zero evidence ever being provided, can only be described as a subconscious programming of the viewer. This particular limiting factor of simple songs to complex compositions, no musical training equals the Beatles could not have written their songs, needs to be looked at more in depth another time. However, we will stay on the subject of the other aspect of the limiting factor, that of formal musical training and reading and writing music being necessary to write successful pop songs. At just over 5 minutes into Mike's presentation, he states, "But even though Lennon and McCartney could not read or write music or had any formal musical training, they turned out hit after hit, with each subsequent album growing in song complexity and maturity." Given that the simple songs to complex compositions idea is a complete fabrication, and that the hits include the early songs, which according to Mike were basic rock, what is being inferred here, along with the drip feeding of the other repetitions, is that the viewer will leave the 4.5 hours of presentation believing that, in general, the Beatles could not have written their songs because they could not read or write music.
Head on, apply directly to the forehead. Head on, apply directly to the forehead. Head on, apply directly to the forehead. Head on.
In advertising, the term effective frequency is used to describe the number of times a consumer must be exposed to an advertising message before the marketer gets the desired response, whether that's buying a product or something as simple as remembering a message. A study from Microsoft researching the optimal number of exposures required for audio messages concluded that between 6 and 20 repetitions worked best at influencing a consumer. Mike informs his audience that the Beatles could not read or write music, had no formal training, and were untrained songwriters 6 times within just 3 minutes and 13 seconds. After this initial bombardment of these 6 statements, printed and narrated, Mike then continues to pepper these direct suggestions a further 11 times throughout his presentation. So we have again a total of 17 repetitions. This technique of repetition with no supporting evidence to manipulate and influence his audience's perceptions is a key feature and another bedrock of Mike's presentation. At 4 minutes and 47 seconds into Mike's video, he presents a slide that tells us that the Beatles could not read or write music. In addition to the printed words, Mike also narrates that they had no formal training. Exactly 2 minutes later, another slide is introduced, this time containing a further 2 statements that tell us that the Beatles were untrained songwriters, could not read or write music. With 3 near identical statements appearing on 2 slides within just 2 minutes, strongly indicate that these slides are more than just innocent visual aids. The slides are also being used to facilitate in the huge number of repetition and to drop direct suggestions into the viewers' minds. Along with the technique of repetition, Mike once again uses the rule of 3. Mike presents a quote from John Lennon where John Lennon stated that none of us are technical musicians, none of us could read music, none of us can write it. This quote from John Lennon is presented 3 times on slides within a 2.5 hour time frame. We can easily deduce that limiting possibility, multiple repetition, and the rule of 3 are all part of a well-conceived plan to influence and manipulate the viewer. Every musician knows that reading and writing music and formal musical training are not necessary for writing successful pop songs, regardless of whether those songs are simple or complex in structure. Some of the most well-loved songs, some of the most influential, including those that are considered classics historically, were composed by musicians with no musical training. Something that Mike, as a musician himself, along with his team of musicians, songwriters, composers and arrangers, each with decades of experience, cannot fail to know.
And I seem to find the happiness I see when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek.
Irving Berlin's mastery of a wide range of song styles, from waltzes, minstrels, boleros, marches, jazz, swing, country and folk music, and even rock and roll, ensured his place in history as one of the most popular and successful songwriters of all time. Berlin had no formal training and was unable to read or write music. He was such a limited piano player that he could only play in the key of F sharp on the black keys of the piano. Berlin used a custom piano equipped with a transposing lever so that he could hear his songs in different keys. Berlin loved to boast about his ignorance of music and famously stated that because he knew so little about the rules of songwriting, that he was free to violate them. In 1916, 6 years after his career had taken off, Berlin briefly took piano lessons but quickly decided that he preferred to dictate his songs just as he always had done before. Some sources quote Berlin's output at over 800 songs, while other sources go as high as 1,500. Berlin also wrote for 19 Broadway shows and 18 movies. White Christmas is still to this day the greatest selling single of all time, with over 50 million copies sold. Jazz guitarist Django Reinhardt is considered to be one of the greatest and most influential guitarists of all time. He once stated, "I played professionally for nearly 20 years before I could read music, but I could hear it." Dave Brubeck's compositions have become jazz standards. His music is famous for employing unusual time signatures and superimposing contrasting rhythms, meters and tonalities. While Brubeck was versed in music notation, he found it difficult to go from the dots on the page to the keys on the piano. On being asked whether he eventually learned to read music, Brubeck replied, "You can't teach me. Everyone has tried, starting with my mother. I have some kind of block. I'm not alone. There are a lot of guys who have a name like mine who can't read music."
From Russia with love, I fly to you.
English composer Lionel Bart also had no formal training and could not read or write music. Bart also composed music for movies, musicals and wrote pop songs. Bart would hum his tunes into a dictaphone or tap them out with one finger on the piano. Living Dolls, sung by Cliff Richard in 1957, went to number 1 in the UK for 6 weeks and was number 1 across Europe, selling over 1 million copies. The song was written by Bart in 10 minutes. Mike Pratt, Tommy Steele and Bart wrote 12 of the 14 songs for the movie The Tommy Steele Story in 1 week. The album was the first album ever to reach number 1 in the UK by a UK act. Bart, though, is most famous for his musical Oliver, for which he was the sole creator. The film version of Oliver won 6 Academy Awards and earned Bart Broadway's Tony Award for Best Original Score and Lyrics. Oliver is one of the most successful musicals of all time.
Please, sir, I want some more.
Holy smoke, Glenn saved alive. I never thought it could happen to me. Yeah. Yeah. I got stung by a sweet honeybee. Oh, what a feeling come over me. It started in my eyes, crept up to my head, polluted my heart. I was stung, yet I'm not. I got stung.
Aaron Schroeder liked to say, "I don't read music, that's why I make so much money." Schroeder wrote and co-wrote more than 2,000 songs and was the composer on more than 1,500 recordings by Rosemary Clooney, Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Arlo Guthrie, Shaka Khan, The Beatles, Art Garfunkel, Barry White, Roy Orbison, Pat Boone, Perry Como, Gene Pitney, Dionne Warwick and Nat King Cole, amongst many others. Schroeder co-wrote 17 songs for Elvis, 5 of which reached number 1.
Would you mind singing one with me that I wrote?
I'd love to.
Okay, don't. Let me be a little kinder. Let me be a little blinder to the thoughts of those about me. Let me praise a little more.
The Wrecking Crew were a group of elite session musicians based in LA in the 1960s. Most of the Wrecking Crew did have formal training in jazz or classical music. One of them, however, Glenn Campbell, had no such training and could not read or write music. Before his solo career, Campbell played on recordings by Dean Martin, the Everly Brothers, Sammy Davis Jr., Bing Crosby and Elvis, to name just a few. Campbell also wrote and co-wrote songs. His last, I'm Not Going to Miss You, released in 2013, won him his 6th Grammy Award. Dolly Parton wrote I Will Always Love You and Jolene in the same day. Dolly Parton is said to have written and co-written around 3,000 songs, despite having no formal training or being able to read or write music. The Bee Gees wrote 1,030 songs during their career and achieved 9 number 1 singles on the Hot 100 chart. According to Billboard, this puts them in 3rd place for the most number 1s in history, despite the brothers never having learned to read or write music. Kurt Cobain couldn't read or write music. Historically, there are very few albums that make such an impact as Nevermind did upon its release by Nirvana in 1991. The album is credited with rewriting the music handbook for alternative musicians and had such a significant effect that it completely shifted the musical and cultural landscape, setting a new precedent not only in music but in style and attitude. With over 30 million albums sold, Nevermind is one of the biggest selling albums of all time.
I wish I was special, but I'm cool.
Tom York also can't read or write music. Radiohead have sold over 30 million albums. Lionel Richie can't read or write music. His 9 number 1s put him in a tie with Diane Warren as a solo artist with the most number 1s. Nick Mason and Roger Waters of Pink Floyd also can't read or write music. In 1968, they invented their own system of music notation. Diane Warren only ever had one music lesson whilst at school, during which she says she wasn't paying attention. Warren, who writes one song per week, has written over 1,000 songs for artists as diverse as Elton John, Aretha Franklin, Aerosmith, Cher, Beyoncé, Roy Orbison, Barbra Streisand, amongst many, many others. Warren has had 100 songs in the US charts, 9 number ones in the United States alone, and is the first songwriter to have 7 hits, all by different artists, in the US charts, all at the same time. Her music has appeared in over 100 movies. Other musicians who had no formal training and couldn't or can't read or write music include Taylor Swift, Slash, Pete Townsend, Keith Richards, Dave Grohl, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton. This list of musicians is by no means definitive. As stated earlier, every musician knows that formal training and reading and writing music are not necessary to create pop songs, be they simple or complex. On the contrary, formal training is not the norm within the rock-pop genre. In fact, it could be called a rarity. Mike's 17 statements that tell us that the Beatles could not read or write music and that they had no formal training and were untrained songwriters is nothing less than an orchestrated attempt by Mike to deceive his audience. One can only conclude then that there must be some underlying agenda.
It must be a pretty sick collection of minds to dream up a plan like that.
I don't know how someone controlled you. They bought and sold you. I look from the wings at the play you are staging, while my guitar gently